So moving on to the next session, our next speaker, Allison Brooks, is one of the most highly regarded and charismatic architects in practice. So there's no one better placed to unlock the subject of engagement and the essential role that it plays in leadership and getting things done. So as well as highlighting how engagement can allow architects to make connections with the public and the architectural community, Alison will emphasise the instrumental role it plays in motivating clients, colleagues and the wider design team in the everyday life of practice. Thank you, Alison.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Really interesting and inspiring to hear the talks that came before me. It's kind of interesting to have been invited to this because I've always had an aversion to the term leadership. I've always felt it was, slightly, not exactly cynical, but it was sort of a way of projecting power relations. It's sort of co-opted by the business world. Business MBAs are always talking about leadership and how to find our future leaders. And I feel it creates a kind of pressure, a sort of undue pressure to be somebody that you're not, naturally, meant to be. And so, but at the same time, I've started to realize that actually leadership qualities or strategies, I think more, is a kind of thinking that's not taught in architecture schools at all, and it's a real problem that we don't see ourselves as leaders when we're in architecture school. It's all about design and how to come up with the greatest idea and the best project, and there's not a lot of discussion or conversation about how to engage with colleagues or communities. It's probably different now. I'm talking about, 30 years ago. So I've always sort of questioned the word leadership, which is probably not a good thing to say in this context. I prefer the hive mind model, where there's a project, there are problems, you sort of open up the problem to people on a team, and you listen to everybody and try to sort of extract the best ideas from everybody on the team. But at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision about what is the best idea, and sometimes the best ideas combine to form a kind of hybrid solution, or sometimes you have to sort of go away and think and draw alone and try to come up with a solution. But that was always my goal, to sort of make the practice and the work of the practice open to everybody to contribute to, and hopefully push it forward, and in a way to find people better than me who can join my practice and help us grow and sort of achieve really a sort of mission that was about architecture. Like, I won't deny that. It's always about the architecture and about the work. And so that's another reason why I've always shied away from the focus on sort of personality and all of that, because that was never my sort of natural vision of myself. I also believe that everyone has the capacity to change. I didn't start out I think I didn't start out my career in architecture thinking I was going to definitely have my own practice and, be a sole principal, or I always thought, I'll have partners, I'll meet people, I'll work with people, we'll form a sort of partnership, and you sort of have this image of how your life in architecture will evolve, and it just didn't turn out that way. But I do think that everybody has the capacity to change. So I also kind of disagree with all this, sort of character typing, because I think you can be quite shy and, insecure and be a certain type at 25 and be another type at 30 and another type at 35. Everybody has the capacity to evolve and change. So if I sort of go into a bit of a slideshow. Last year, I celebrated 21 years of Allison Brooks Architects and put on an exhibition and a big party at Somerset House, and so used it as an opportunity to also publish a book. And I'm showing this because it's, I suppose, the first time I made a very deliberate effort to sort of take the full body of work of my practice and sort of put it out into the public realm in a way, and also celebrate the role of my clients and consultant colleagues and sort of everybody who's ever worked at ABA could come to this big party and sort of celebrate their contribution. And it was an important thing, and I think a lot of practices, they probably do something like this every year with their clients, but I'm not very good at sort of client care, sort of doing those lunches and meeting at the pub and drinks afterward. Even in the course of today, I think I've been at 3 meetings where clients have said, oh, and we were talking about this and then we ended up at the pub. It's such a convention that, I don't know, in the construction industry, it sort of ends up with this bonding session in the pub afterward, and I think that is kind of a male thing. But anyway, that's also a form of client care, and I'm not particularly good at it because I've always been kind of just focused on trying to be very professional and getting the work done. But yeah, so at this exhibition, I also showed things from my education, my studies at University of Waterloo. The words on the walls of that central image are all the books that we read during our 3 years of cultural history. Everything from St. Augustine, City of God, to Revolt of the Masses, like a very sort of in-depth cultural, literary, and artistic history program that was part of the University of Waterloo's architecture course. Very influential for me. And then just a range of projects and evolutionary models and some of the team. And I also published this book. It's a self-published book, and in it I took the opportunity to sort of publish things I'd been talking about for quite a few years in my lectures. And as you can see, it's called Ideals, Then Ideas. And I sort of realized slowly over time that actually putting my sort of personal belief system, like my ethical position, at the forefront of my work was actually a very useful tool in actually helping clients to sort of believe in what I was trying to present to them, that the values that I held dear were actually underpinning everything that I was doing. And I tried to distill these values or ideals into 4: authenticity, generosity, civicness, and beauty. And for me, it was really important in a way to set these out as, in a way, it synthesizes the quest that I think I had, or the mission, when I set up ABA, to always try to find an architectural language, a means of expression for every project that was absolutely specific to its place, to its client, to the context, to the history and culture of a place, but also that, it's also about authorship. I see the word, obviously, authenticity has the same root as authorship. And, you can always be inclusive and interested and engaged and responsive to a context, but at the end of the day, you will always put something of yourself, something that, is between your brain and the end of your hand, your youthful experience, your life experience, your artistic intent. It does come from you as a person. And I think Teresa and several people have mentioned that today, that actually you as a person are really important because you're interesting, because you have a different set of tools, perspective, values than everybody else. And so in a way, the uniqueness of each architect or each creative person to sort of put their stamp on something, their personal signature, I think is really key to authenticity. Generosity, I think we all, as architects, we're always sort of fighting for generosity in our work, sort of more space, more opportunities for people to live really high quality lives in generous and adaptable places. And in a way, if you start using this language at the outset of a project, I think most clients, even some quite hard-nosed commercial clients, will start thinking, you know, should I be more generous in my approach to this project, this site, in terms of giving back to a long-term future, a long-term constituency, and not just the the immediate return, excuse me, of the project. So, and it has to do with proportions. It does have to do with space and volume and finding parts of the brief that aren't in the brief that people really enjoy. And I think this is something that a theme that Grafton architects have drawn upon in this year's Biennale theme, which is free space. And it's the spaces in architecture that go beyond the brief, that are places and spaces that are sort of offered to the public to use in multiple ways and over time, and it's about light, it's about texture, it's about all these things. So yeah, generosity. And civicness is, for me, the imperative that every project acts as a public building, especially housing, that when you form the space of the street, the space of cities and neighborhoods, every building has a civic role. And if you sort of apply the standards that you normally apply to public buildings, to private buildings, and understand them as civic, that also raises the bar. Beauty, that's a whole other subject, but I also decided it was important that architects start talking about beauty, that we are comfortable to say that we are actually here to introduce and help people to live in beautiful places, that we actually have an aesthetic education as well as a conceptual and technical education, and we should be able to sort of defend our work in terms of beauty, because there are many ways you can conceive of and discuss beauty, but beauty is also recognizable and everybody desires beauty. So those are the four themes. So I'm kind of rambling on, but within the book, I sort of organized the content of the book in terms of the sort of history of the practice's work into these themes. I'm not sure how many of them there are, but I would say that every project I've done has been exploring one of these themes, ideas of assembly, folding and unfolding, hybridism. And so every project is a kind of essay. And this is, I suppose, something I bring from my education at Waterloo, that the thesis, the principle that every project should be a kind of testing ground where you test ideas and you, not exactly as an experiment, but you try to prove a thesis through your work. And so I suppose this quality of mission is something that attracts people to my practice, and I think it's something that drives me, because I always feel like we have to try something different. If we've tried something that we've done before, we have to build on it and evolve our work, our language, and also evolve as a practice. So I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I can sort of talk about the evolution of the practice in a way through the projects. This is really the first project I did in the UK after I set up ABA, the VXO house in Hampstead, and that was exploring, in a way I was sort of exploring the sort of lexicon of modernist tools when it comes to composition, that every element in this project is expressed as a discrete piece. So all the facades are an L-shaped plane of either timber or concrete or wood. There's a site-specific piece of art in the foyer. I'm trying to sort of integrate landscape with interior. The barcode patterning on the windows was referring to the client who is an investor in dot-com startups. Sort of every sort of piece of the building, of the project, was a discrete piece in this sort of tradition of modernist expression of elements. Each element, is a functional thing. And yeah, being quite playful with structure. And at this point, I'd finished the Atoll Hotel in Germany. This was kind of the only project in the office. It was also a conversion, of a 1960s building. So we opened up the middle of the house to light with a big atrium, double height space, a kind of theme in all of my work. And at the same time, I had sort of my team that I'd had doing my hotel in Germany of about 5-6 architects. They all kind of left back to Europe or wherever they came from, and I had one person left in the office, and I had a 3-week-old baby, and it was like a disaster. The whole thing was, trying to keep the office running and racing around with this baby in a bucket. I had an older child as well. Not a bucket, those carry seats that you that you run around with. Well, I ran around with. And I had an older child, and there was no money, and it was really sort of hard times. And that was sort of 99 to 2002, I think. And then I submitted it for an RBA award, and it got an RBA award, and it was published, and it sort of saved me. I would say that RBA rescued me from the wilderness by publishing the VXO House, and it led to a lot of things after that. But I took that project as I sort of thought, well, I've done that. I've done the kind of modernist thing. I'm going to look at something quite different, which is trying to make a project out of one material. I should have the concept diagrams here, but basically, this extension to houses is conceptually one sheet of brass that's cut and folded to form a roof, columns, bench, walls, sunshade. I was trying to sort of reduce all the elements of architecture into one surface and see how far I could push that. So you can see it's very planar, and having to work with mirror polished stainless steel to make thicknesses go away, and kind of things with optical illusion, and to make a very sort of transparent and invisible, disappearing sort of architecture. And also the brass comes into the house. It's 3 mil thick patinated brass. So, and then of course some little Miesian columns. And so this was another kind of experiment, a sort of thesis about how can you dematerialize architecture and take it back to sort of two elements. That's in Wandsworth, the Fold House. And then Salt House, I did sort of, this was sort of, 2003, I think. And this was a sort of mini competition of a man and his family who lived in Highgate, and he wanted a sort of weekend summer house, and he sort of looked up architects in the yellow pages, all the ones who had an office in N1. And luckily, my office was in N1, and Allison Brooks Architects was at the top of the yellow pages, so A and B. So I got a couple of projects that way with the A and the B. Anyway, and so this project was another kind of test of how to work with a sort of vernacular language of hipped roof fishermen's cottages. It's in the Malden Estuary. And so I was sort of taking on a vernacular roof form for the first time, sort of leaving behind my modernist roots. And also the client wanted an atrium house, so it's a kind of hybrid atrium house. There's a roof light at the top. The bay windows become the facade, so it's a hipped roof with faceted elevations which create all sorts of interesting geometric distortions. And the idea was that it would sort of express the wind and the kind of weather of the place, and actually sort of reinterpret this typology in the spirit of the North American beach house, where it's a series of timber decks and space flows through, and it's also in a floodplain. So, and that was also in sort of working with a single plane that you manipulate to be facade and wall and stair. So, and then that project actually won the Mansur Medal in 2006, and so that was a really, I mean, it was great to have got that recognition. And interestingly, the work in houses sort of gave me credibility in terms of getting work in working with housing developers, larger scale projects, and being invited to do the Accordia project. This is a slight anomaly. This is a few years later, but the Lens House, again, sort of taking the idea of faceted walls and planes even farther, in sort of trying to achieve total plasticity, that the exterior form is an exact reflection of the interior space. And the cladding is Corian, and it's the first time Corian's been used as a cladding material in the UK. So this is a house extension, but it's also a workspace. So the client is a photography agency. So we excavated down a story, created this workspace, and actually that whole basement level has been excavated down to create this sort of connected series of spaces. And yeah, so this is the workspace. And then this opened up double height space in what is a sort of Victorian terraced house, which completely changes the nature of the way the house works. And the living room is a sort of minstrel's gallery over the kitchen. And sort of going a little bit back in time at Cordia, that was the sort of great opportunity that, in a way, the VXO house brought me. Sort of enough of a track record and other projects I'd done that Field and Clark Bradley were aware of to invite me to do 40 units within the Accordia master plan. And so these semi-detached houses, again, it's a completely different language. You can see it's sort of drawing on the Georgian tradition that Field and Clark Bradley were working with, but I was really interested in exploring a new roof form, and these houses have a triple height space at the center of the house, and under that big curving green roof is a split level family room. So it's a split level house with an atrium with a curving roof. So really ambitious, I suppose, and this is spec housing, countryside properties, but because they were on the front of this sort of grand street in Cambridge, we were able to sort of really go for it. And so again, the exterior cladding material comes inside as the fireplace, and yeah, that's the triple height space. Split levels. This is the family room up under the roof. And so this idea of using roof space to create multi-purpose space within the home to sort of reanimate and reactivate the roof, sort of in the way, in the arts and crafts period, roofs were a place where people worked and had studios. And also in the early Industrial Revolution, a lot of mills and looms and weaving communities used the top floors of their houses as workspace. And then I also, in a way, brought those studies in geometry and folding and continuity to our larger scale building at Accordia, and this is the brass building. And that was about trying to create a sort of mirage, a building that's a constantly changing sort of figure in terms of its light and shadow, and creating a unique perspective from every flat in the building. So these are, I suppose, you hone your skills throughout these projects, and I probably shouldn't really be talking about projects at all. I should be talking about, how architects working today can sort of find their voice and find their abilities. I would say, just this is obviously Newhall, and kind of zooming through it. It's another kind of project where we broke a lot of rules. These are prefabricated timber houses with 2.6 meter high ceilings, and every house has a workspace. So every house has a study, which is not a bedroom. That was embedded in the design of the houses from day one. So it was about trying to transform suburbs from being bedroom communities to being working communities. Yeah, again, then the Folks in Performing Arts Center, another language, another material that's trying to respond in a very specific way to folks and then to, the idea of being a beacon for the arts and for the community. And then more urban housing. Obviously, this is more recent, Ely Court, which was shortlisted for the Mies Award. And so influences from Accordia, from, all of our earlier projects sort of find their way into these projects. And I mean, I suppose the teams that have been with me to sort of deliver these projects they all, I try to create an environment where everybody can contribute in a really big way. For example, this is the Cohen Quadrangle, a new college for Exeter College in Oxford. And my competition team was a recent graduate, somebody in the middle of his studies at Harvard GSD, and a recent graduate from the AA. And they did the competition scheme for this project, which we won. I mean, obviously there were about 9 people in the office working on it in the last couple of weeks, but for 2 months, it was these 2 people in my office who I worked with even when I was on holiday remotely, and gave them really full rein to, come up with strategic planning. I can't go into the detail because I'm running out of time, but it's basically an S-shaped building where the spaces in the ground floor are connected by 2 cloisters, and it's the first college building in Oxford to have a dedicated social learning space. So when you come in the building, this is the Porter's Lodge. It's new build. There's teaching rooms on the right, a cloister that also leads past teaching rooms. This is the Porter's Lodge. It's a glazed cloister that's just framed with glulam timber arches that sort of draw on the history of the building on the site. This is the Learning Commons, the dedicated social learning space that was not in the competition brief. We found when we changed the plan diagram from a C shape to an S shape, we created a new space in the building at that sort of turn in the building form, and that it's become the most important space in the whole building. And it's also split level with triple height spaces, so it's a cafe, it's a kind of library, it's a study space, and then there's also an auditorium. Fellows studies up under the roof, so you probably recognize elements from Accordia, where we first started working with curved roofs, and then a kind of very strong sort of iconography of the roof, which is a checkerboard pattern in stainless steel, and that refers to the checkerboard lattice of the Turl Street quad. Exeter College's sort of 700-year-old campus, about a 10-minute walk away. So, and we're also doing towers. This is in the Greenwich Peninsula. It got planning last year. Another kind of language from another context, and then another project in King's Cross, which is about creating a sort of landmark overlooking the park, but it's also very much offering civic space, sort of arcade and colonnade at the ground floor, and trying to turn sort of commercial housing development into true civic building, urban building that's adaptable and multi-purpose. So I just wanted to summarize with a few things, actually more than these 3 things. But yeah, these are some leadership takeaways, I suppose. Root your work in your belief system. I was going to add to the list that Steve was talking about at the beginning when he said, what are the qualities that I think leaders should have? And I would add listening, like the ability to listen to, it's not on that list there, but if you really listen to people and are interested in what they're saying, I think you have a much more fruitful conversation and a better relationship with the people you work with. And I think a lot of leaders are very interested in the sound of their own voice, and they're not great listeners. And so I think it's really important to just be aware of that clients love being listened to, but also everybody likes being listened to very actively in a conversation and having their ideas valued. And I suppose that's about trust and respect. So yeah, empathy, enthusiasm, energy, and a sense of humor. I think a lot of architects take everything they do too seriously, and it's really important to laugh and to be able to laugh at yourself and crack jokes as you work. It's better if you don't have your headphones plugged in. If you want to have banter in the office and if you want to listen and hear what's going on, try not to wear headphones. Sort of open up to the world around you. And this thing, it's not about you, it's about the architecture. This is, I think, the opposite of something somebody said earlier. It's all about you. I think when you have a sense of mission, that you have a personal project or that your values align with the practice that you're working with, that's what's important. And in a way, like directing your energy to achieve that goal can offer, really amazing results. And so the sort of principle of being proactive, treat your office as if it's your own. Don't ever act like, I believe this, that when you work somewhere, if you treat it like your own, you never sit there and say, oh, well, you're not doing this for me and you're not doing that for me. It's the John Kennedy quote, ask not what your company can do for you, ask what you can do for your company. That's what employers love, is people coming forward proactively and saying, why don't we do this? Can we try doing that? How can we change this or change that? I think positive, proactive change coming from the people you work with is the best thing for an architect, I would say, from my experience. So thank you for listening. I hope I've offered some helpful tips. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, for sharing how you've engaged both with your own values, with your collaborators, and with your team members to deliver such beautiful projects. I think Steve's now going to make some connections between what Alison's just said and the engage part of his leadership framework.
So first of all, on the architecture side of things, wow. Some of the buildings blew my socks off, so I thought they were fantastic. On the leadership side of things, I'll pull out three themes which will reinforce where we were earlier. I talked earlier about having fierce resolve and true humility. When you're in the humility space, you're a great listener, and you want to, the first phrase I wrote down, you want to extract the best ideas from others. That's the first key phrase I heard this afternoon. And I wrote down another word next to it straight away, which is one of my favourite words in this space of how do you engage others. One of my answers is invite them to co-invent. When extracting these ideas, that's an invitation. Will you co-invent, co-design, co-create with me? So old style leader, I have to arrive with the answers. No, new style leader who wants to engage, you arrive with your questions and invite others' best answers. There's a space there in the engaged co-invention, humility, listening bubble. Oh, we're not on, are we now? Okay. Second one is, I'd absolutely reinforce, whatever you got in your personality test today, don't feel you'll necessarily always have to be that way. We can all grow. I've been inspired so many times working with people and seeing them absolutely transform as leaders by simply identifying which leadership muscles they wanted to build, then consciously go out and just practice building them. So look forward to that growth. Get clear on which muscles you want to build and then find ways to practice. The other piece in that space, by the way, I had a conversation with somebody on one of the breaks, and I just got a sense he was trying to travel alone on this journey. And I said, whatever you do, do not travel alone. You must have a support team. And part of your support team will encourage you in your practice to become the leader you want to be. All of that, those first 2 points, are subordinate for me to the third one, which is I've just heard the best example I've heard for many a year of somebody being clear on what they care about, which then shapes what they're up to. And the phrase was ideals, then ideas. Absolutely superb. So there were 4 words which are Alison's ideals on there, which you can then tell shaped what she was up to, what ideas she had, which she then put into practice. So my final thought for the day before I run out of the door is you've seen Alison's 4 ideals as a statement of what she cares about. What might your equivalent be? You might not be clear now, but my betting is if you want to be great in this field, you'll need to work them out sometime. Just some thoughts, hopefully to help tie in the day. I'm going to dash out the door, but hey, some great speakers today. I wish you well on your journey growing as a leader. Thank you.